Graham, Kraken, etc. Last weekend at the movies, I saw a trailer for a flick that reminded me of a book I have not reviewed here on the channel. I got the wheels turning and I thought, okay, I want to talk a little bit about this movie and then a lot more about the book. So a couple of years ago, there was a Blumhouse horror flick called M3gan, kind of a standard fare, like a robot goes evil and kills people type movie. Blumhouse does horror really well. They're known for it. I guess they're kind of a smaller studio, but they're really successful. I don't watch a whole lot of horror. It's not a genre that I've gotten into, and it seems like people who watch horror are like really passionate about it. Like, oh, I need to watch this new slasher flick. For me, like there are atmospheric elements to it that I enjoy, especially around Halloween time. But I'm not this type of viewer that like, oh, I always need to be watching a horror movie or reading a horror novel. It's never been something I could get into. But I remember this one getting really good reviews, M3gan. It was about these parents that through, I don't know if they invented it or they bought it or whatever, but they got this kind of life-sized Barbie doll for their daughter, and it had some kind of basic artificial intelligence, and through some mishap or another, it became evil and it started to kill anybody that was going to hurt, through its own interpretation, the little girl, Katie. And, the standard stuff happens from there, I assume. Like I said, I never saw it. I just heard that it was a really successful movie. I didn't know they were making a sequel until I went to see The Amateur, and M3gan 2.0 was one of the trailers they played. I remember seeing the trailer for the first one. The trailer for the second one makes it look less like a horror and more like an action movie with some horror elements to it. But the trailer was so ridiculously comical, I actually laughed at a couple of spots. But I don't mean that it was comical in the sense that they were trying really hard to make something serious and it looked so spastic and weird and bad that you laughed at it. Like, I feel like they knew exactly what they were doing and the aesthetic that they were leaning into with the music and the dialogue bits and everything. It just looked so tonally distinct from the first one. The premise of the second one is that the lady who invented the first robot, M3gan, she's also responsible for, to some degree, for creating a second robot called Amelia, which is even more evil, wicked, and twisted, and wants to kill anybody associated with its own creation. So that would include the lady who invented it and also her daughter, who is Katie. And that means, M3gan wants to protect Katie, and they've isolated M3gan and put her in some cheap plastic toy, and she's like, well, no, I can fight this other robot for you, but you got to put me in a better robot body. And they're like, oh, this is going to be a mistake. So it's that kind of plot where it's like, oh, we're being hunted by something bad, we've got to go bust somebody out of prison that was in a previous installment and make them fight each other. It's two evil chick robots fighting each other, very female coded, as we'll say. And this whole trailer was playing against a backdrop of Oops, I Did It Again by Britney Spears, which, like, that right there, it sets a tone, it sets an expectation, and it added like a dark, ironic, comedic element to the entire appearance of it, and it just made me laugh. There were a couple of like slightly tongue-in-cheek, eye-rolling bits of dialogue. There was one line where I was just like, okay, that one was bad, but the rest of it it almost looked funny. I might actually see M3gan at some point, just so that I can be caught up for when M3gan 2.0 happens. I don't know. We'll see. But the trailer reminded me. Now let's set the movie aside and get into the book. The trailer reminded me of a book called Sakura, Intellectual Property, which there's a story and then there's the story behind the story. I'm going to save the story behind the story for last, and I'm going to be kind of minimalist about it because I want to talk about this book on its own merits. It has 3 authors. My rule about any book with collaborators is that it's usually twice as long as it needs to be. This one is even more so. In print, it's 625 pages. In audio, it's close to 20 hours. It is a big chunk of a book. That said, while there are parts of it that don't flow as well as I think they could, and they're a little bit overwritten, it's like, okay, you could trim maybe 20% of the word count here and you'd be good. Overall, it was a very satisfying read. It's set slightly in the future after Japan has gone to war with North Korea, and they're kind of in the recovery phase. They're a few steps past like the initial recovery phase. The government is very weak and very limited in what it can do, and instead most of the country is run or owned by corporations, for better or worse. The main character is an android called Sakura, and if I remember right, Sakura is the Japanese word for the cherry blossom trees, the ones that they bloom every spring. There's a whole bunch of like cultural festivals and stuff around it. James May did an episode about that when he went to Japan on that Amazon show. It looked really cool, really peaceful. Just a neat thing to experience with your countrymen if you're Japanese, or I guess if you're a tourist, but I digress. Anyway, Sakura is her name. She's an android specifically engineered to be a pop star is the wrong word. She's a heavy metal rock musician. The book opens up with her about to like ascend through a trap door and go up on stage and perform for a concert. You know, most of these bands are corporate owned, even though heavy metal is all about rebelling against the man and whatever, kind of like rock. As she's getting ready to go up on stage, she can tell that her CPU or central processor or whatever for her AI is getting hacked. And all of a sudden she's enslaved by some entity, she doesn't know who. And suddenly there's a second AI, we'll say, like a second personality inside her called Kunoichi. She plays the concert, but she's not able to defeat the hack. And all of a sudden she starts kind of getting taken over by Kunoichi at different times, and she starts getting sent on these like execution missions, assassination jobs, and she's kind of just stuck along for the ride. Soon she's got to figure out how to control or isolate or kind of silo off the Kunoichi personality and keep it from taking over her. She also discovers things about her own engineering that she didn't know. The fact that she was basically built for military grade operations instead of just being a pretty feminine heavy metal robot chick. And there are also some developments with her AI, with her intelligence. She's able to kind of evolve past her original parameters, sort of in an Isaac Asimov way, like in a three laws way. Like I was able to evolve past the three laws to where I can actively disobey them. But it's more than that. Like for all intents and purposes, she becomes a self-determining identity. And she's even able to be creative and to really embody the tenets of the heavy metal rock persona to where she can rebel against her own programming. And she becomes kind of an iconic figurehead for this rebellion against all of the corporate control in Japan. She does eventually figure out who's hacking her. She's got to put together a team of people that she can actually trust, not just other androids, but other human beings and whatnot. And she's got to go around the country and do some subversive stuff and all of that while she's on tour. So the concept of it is really strong, and there are definitely scenes that are really strong and exciting. There's one part where she's got to do like a skydive to get onto a tall building to go after a target. Just there's so much of it that's really, really cool. Oh, just saw a really cool wagon for sale, because I definitely have money and time to work on something like that, but I digress. Like overall, it was a very enjoyable book. I read it in paperback when it came out in 2019. I grabbed a copy of it at a writer's con that I was at, and the other two of the three authors were there, and this is where I guess I'll get into the backstory of it. I believe I had them sign it. Here's what's going on. So the main author was Zachary Hill, who sadly died in, I think it was 2018. It would have been January of 2018. And it extra sucked because if I remember right, it was right before his 1 year anniversary. Like he'd been married, and then I don't remember what it was. Like it was just some random medical condition that up and got him, and he died shortly before his 1 year anniversary. I never met Zach. I was familiar with other writings of his. I'm Facebook friends with his twin brother Josh and his other relative. I can't remember if George is like his dad or his other like older brother, George Hill over on X. Um, great family. They're all writers. They're all very well accomplished in their spheres. And I read a couple of other books that Zachary Hill did. Everybody that knew him, I never was like internet friends with him. I think I became friends with George and Josh after the fact, but I digress. Like everybody that knew him just loved the guy, and they missed him tremendously. Two other writers stepped up to finish this manuscript that they knew he was working on, and that's the other two who are credited on here. It's Paul Janess and Patrick Tracy. They knew that Zachary Hill was really excited about this project he was working on, and they wanted to finish it for him, kind of as a dedicatory thing, and then like all the royalties, proceeds, whatever would go to his widow. The story behind the story is going to be a boost. It'll get people interested in the emotional side of it and like wanting to pick it up and buy it so that they can help out the family of a writer who was gone too soon. But the question would then remain like, okay, that's a beautiful thing to do. Is the book still good on its own? After having read it, I will say yes. I would probably give it 3.5 stars, primarily because of the length. As I've said, like any book with more than one author is going to end up being, in most cases, longer than it needs to be. And I thought that the pacing really lagged and suffered at times. I picked up the audiobook a year or two ago to reread it. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure if I finished the audiobook. The narrator was fine. But I've read this book almost twice, and I had the same experience with it the second time that I did with the first. It's like, I could stand for this thing to kind of tighten up the pacing, but that's just a consequence of it being handled by 3 different authors. I believe Paul Janess commented on a post I did about it years ago and said something to the effect like he and Patrick had to kind of flesh it out. I think they added a couple of characters. It might have been Paul who added the Kunoichi entity. Like there was more, I assume, like left behind by Zachary's notes. So like all of this is just kind of a natural consequence of the fact that it had a couple of collaborators behind it to make it happen. But that said, I think about lit RPGs or other indie fantasies or indie sci-fis that I've read over the years, and a lot of them kind of have that same, not necessarily wandering, but overwrought examination of character motivations and thought processes and stuff, to the point where you end up with an elevated word count because the character goes to a lot of places and has a lot of conversations, and there's more to the story. I don't particularly vibe with those books either. I even got out of reading Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere books just because I felt like these are too long, they're too much, so it's all fictional. But books like that obviously have their audience, and so if you don't mind long and at times slow burn sci-fi, then the things that make this a bit of a slow read for me will probably not bother you all that much. But overall, like, this was a great take on the idea of an AI as a main character and developing, we'll just say, a soul on its own, being able to fight its own programming and overcome its built-in limitations to become more than what it was. Maybe not necessarily like the most novel idea in robot fiction, but it was handled very well and it made for an enjoyable read. It was cool to see it all play out in that setting. Apparently, Hill lived in Japan for a while. I know like he was in the military, and then I think he spent some time in Italy and then some time in Japan, but he always had some love for the Japanese culture, and that love like really shows through when he writes from the perspective of a Japanese robot living in another post-war Japan and being a heavy metal rocker. Oh, that reminded me of the other thing that kind of slowed it down for me. Like at the end of every chapter or every couple of chapters, there was like a playlist in there of heavy metal songs to listen to, or there were references in the chapters to, she thought about this song or that song. Some of them were fictional, but some of them were also by real bands. Um, that's going to be more of an appeal to like heavy metal listeners who would want to stop and say like, oh, let me look up this song, or I guess ones that are just familiar with the music already. It was another thing that kind of either slowed me down or put me outside of an essential element of the story. But if you can just kind of breeze past that and stick with the story as is, I think you'll have a good time with it. Content warning, language and violence. There's some F bombs and stuff. There was even a scene where Sakura had to fake like a fan had won a meetup contest with her, and she goes to his house, and he thinks that he's basically going to be able to use her as a fornication robot because weird Japanese stuff. But anyway, just know that that's in there. Other than that, like I would give you a recommendation for Sakura Intellectual Property if you haven't read it, and if you want something to hold you over, I guess until this M3gan 2.0 comes out, go look up the trailer. It is completely preposterous, but it's the kind of thing that you can tell, like the people making it were dead serious about what they were doing, and they loved it and they threw themselves into the work. I'm all for that. Drive safe. See you out there.